Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the show. And it's been an exciting time here as we start the new year at Team Secret Witch with the birth of our archetypal apothecary method. I have been hanging out more over on Instagram and TikTok recently, so if you are feeling called to share the journey with us of the birth of our new modality, then head on over to Instagram is at I am Nicole Barton and TikTok is at Team Secret Witch. See you there. In the meantime, on The Secret Witch Show today, our guest is Dana da Ponte. Dana is a professional intuitive and certified map practitioner who helps highly sensitive people manage their sensitivities and enjoy the superpowers that come with them. She believes healing trauma is important if you want to work your magic from a clear place. In today's episode, we explore the role of trauma and shadow in highly sensitive magical women and how we can heal and fully express who we are. We dived into how deep shadow work is the way to self-healing and how magic can help us heal and discover our gifts. Let's dive in. Welcome, Dana. I am delighted to welcome you to the Secret Witch Show after you were recommended by a friend, actually. And I'm really excited to dive into healing trauma with you, and even more so now that I know that we share a name. So welcome.
It's true, we do. I didn't even realize it until this morning, but it's exciting to be here. And I'm so glad that your friend recommended me because it's been lovely to get to know you through your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm delighted that you're here. So where to start? I usually invite women actually to share a little bit about their own journey, particularly in relation to the topic which we're discussing, how to magically tend to your trauma so you can fully express your truth. So I think it feels to me like that would be a great place to begin, if that feels juicy to you.
That does. I feel like I could definitely talk about going down rabbit holes. It might, I could go down that one for a while. But yeah, me and my history with trauma and what it's been like. So for me, I would identify as a highly sensitive person, including someone with a really highly sensitive body that has had so many gifts that come along with being highly sensitive. In fact, my entire career has happened because of my, high sensitivities. But I've also just had a lot of effects from the trauma that I held from a very young age. So my journey with trauma, unfortunately, wasn't really revealed or understood by me until I became really ill. With an invisible illness that nobody could explain or understand. So for 8 years, I was just experiencing so many difficult things that were preventing me from really being myself, showing up in the world how I wanted to. It was just, there's a lot of debilitating experiences around that. But once I journeyed into healing myself, because I had to, because nobody really had any answers for me, then I really started to understand, the true deep roots of what I was going through was trauma. and the trauma experience at such a young age. So it's been humbling, enlightening, ultimately extremely helpful for the work that I do in the end, of course, right? So many of us can, I think, relate to that what we experience ends up being helpful to the other people that surround us as well. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's it sounds like we've got some similarities actually in our journeys, because it was illness that actually initiated me into this work. And I think this is like over a decade ago now, but it strikes me that actually illness is something that the witch herself often experiences as initiation. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that's something that you've associated as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if for me necessarily it wasn't an initiation into my witchiness, because that I experienced when I was pregnant with my son in my early 20s, but it was definitely an initiation into the deeper becoming of just a far more, because I was a channel. So being a channel is a little, you can become a vehicle and relate the messages without necessarily embodying them. But then the initiation into embodying way more of what I was receiving happened when I had my illness, definitely. So there was a definite deepening, of course, when that happened.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. The other piece I loved about your share there was just such magical synchronicity. Again, for me, like witches often are highly sensitive or neurodivergent, and magically, actually, a client of mine this week has just discovered, and she's been reading, I can't remember what the book is now, but the highly sensitive person, the one about highly sensitive people. And yeah, it's quite magical that then I've now got manifested you on the show to talk about exactly that, which wasn't actually part of the title, but it kind of really ties in, because I think so many witches are deeply sensitive and feel a lot of shame around that. So I'm just wondering, and yet, like you say, there's like these gifts that come from that. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, because we can so often get caught in seeing the trauma of that, and it'd be gorgeous to hear a bit more about the gifts and how you alchemize that.
Yeah, I think what's so important on that journey, and something I end up supporting and assisting so many people with, because I had to walk that myself. And I feel like my angelic team, who I work with all the time, was so much a guide towards understanding that with these sensitivities, becoming a manager of your body and understanding how to be compassionate and patient and kind with the limitations of your body, because the limitations, I think, are really difficult to honor in especially the culture that I lived in. It's just a very go, 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 get things done, produce, so much emphasis in that, capitalist kind of culture where it's about producing and it's about showing up in action and it's about being there, open and even extroverted in a way. Whereas when you're highly sensitive, all of these traits just naturally are difficult, or can be, they were just something that I struggled with to begin with, but then add trauma to that and it just amplified those difficulties. So for me, really harnessing the gifts, I feel like when my gifts really showed up, it was in my early 20s to late 20s, and I didn't have mentors. I wasn't ever in that field. I wasn't surrounded by women who identified as witch. There just was not a lot of example of what it was like to have sensitivities, honor them, use them, and know how to manage it in a way that is kind to yourself. So I had to learn that the hard way. And I wasn't, I just happened to be someone who really always went inward, which is so great. But it would have been helpful had I been a little bit more of someone who took classes or who read up on these things. It just wasn't something that I just happened to just go to my angels and my spirit guides, and they were the ones who had the answers for me. And that was awesome. But learning about the body and how to manage it it took a little while for me to learn how to do that so that I could still show up and do the things that I did. And I remember in my work, going from being a teacher to stepping into that mystical field. I just met a lot of people like psychics, mediums, people who were doing that type of work who were just suffering a lot in their body as well. So that was definitely a theme that I saw, that I was surrounded by. And I think there was just this younger self in me who later, when I got ill, was like, oh no, we're not doing that. We're not going to go down that path. We're going to figure out how to use the gifts of the sensitivity, which to me is the ability to be so finely attuned, so finely and magically attuned to the magic that surrounds us, to the invisible realms, to our spirit guides and angels, to the parts of our experience that not everyone can sense or feel easily. So for me, that was an everyday reality experience. I lived in between those worlds. I still live in between those worlds. And so my experience is a little different than a lot of people that I'm surrounded by.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love that. As you're speaking there, it recently, a few months back, became apparent to me. The way I work is with energetic transmissions of remedies that are kind of grounded in the homeopathic lineage, but they're like archetypal personalities. And one of the remedies that all witches are, as like almost like they're born as this constitution, is a remedy called phosphorus. And we've had someone on the show talking about phosphorus before, and phosphorus does have this like deep sensitivity. So it really makes a lot of sense to me that that this kind of is a real big part of the witch and her gifts, like the fact that she can see things and feel things and know things. And I can really feel that when women are kind of in their secret witch and not really understanding that that is part of their gift, like that can really be something that feels quite traumatic in itself, because everything's amplified. But as we learn to harness this gift, I guess it becomes a gift. And I loved what you said at the beginning about like our wounds being where our gifts are as well.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely it doesn't always feel like a gift. And I think it's important to allow, on my journey, it was really important to allow myself to not see it as a gift, because I think a lot of spiritual bypassing can happen when you're stuck just, oh, it's a gift, it's a good thing, see the good thing. And that's great. And yes, I definitely go there, and it's so helpful. And so, such an important part of the healing, but it's also an important part of the healing to see like, wow, this sucks. I hate this. This is hard. This is really hard. What I have to carry, what I'm going through is really difficult. And just, I remember at this point in my illness and just realizing, wow, like I've just been allowing myself to complain in a way, just allowing myself to just really go deep in the like, this sucks. And it was so freeing and so helpful. I'm sure it was difficult on my husband, and I'm sure it was difficult on my mom, my two go-to people, and my friends, my go-to people, but it was so helpful to swim in that for a bit, because it was so validating. And I think that's what's really important to understand about trauma, is that so much of it has happened and exists just simply because feelings that were big were not held. They were not held, they were not heard, they were either dismissed, ridiculed, blamed, shamed, judged. So these difficult, uncomfortable feelings, the not happy feelings, the ones that, you can't put a positive slide on it just yet, or put your rosy sunglasses on just yet. But those really, really difficult, uncomfortable feelings are hard for people to be with. And it's actually really, once you become conscious of it, it's actually fun noticing it, because you'll just notice it in interactions that as soon as you slip into some of that uncomfortable emotions like grief, rage, anger, just how quickly someone will either want to change the subject or put a happy spin on it, or it's just fascinating to watch. And I do it myself. I do it to myself, right? Like, because it's such a conditioned response. We all do it. That's what we've been taught in our culture to do. So it's quite normal, but it's also fascinating because it's part of what caused the trauma to begin with, right?
I really love that you said that. One of the places that our women have often come from, they've kind of walked this path and they've explored magic to an extent. But I always say, when I was talking to you about woo light, which isn't intrinsically light, it's just the way it's interacted with. What I mean by that is the kind of more typical self-help, personal development world of magic, which is almost magic put into a mundane box to make it more palatable. And they've kind of taken the bits that are just like, well, we'll just plaster over it all, and we'll make affirmations, and we'll manifest, and like there's this undercurrent that the witch is actually here for, which is like the deep dark work of shadow and the being with all of the stuff that our culture just isn't taught to be with. I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, I think it's not even just it's in me, it's within me. Like, I even have that response. So I think I'm going to use an analogy because I think it'll help me kind of explain or express my experience with the trauma. So I want you to imagine a bus. And this is like the most beautiful, amazing spirit bus that was like totally perfectly made for you. And just when you looked at it, it really exemplified who you are. And when you went in that bus, as all buses do, they have a driver's seat and they have all of these other seats for all the passengers, right? And in an ideal situation, you would be sitting in that driver's seat and you would be able to be like, oh, okay, I want to head over to this destination. I want to go and manifest this in my life, or I have this intention to experience this. And in an ideal situation, everything in the bus just works with you. You move forward, you head in that direction, and everything is working and flowing towards that direction. But interestingly enough, there's so much more that exists in this vehicle that is you, in this system that is you, right? So when it comes to the shadow work, what I see it as is I tend to see myself as kind of like a whole being, with a core self, like my spirit self or my true self. A lot like how Dick Schwartz would describe it in his book, No Bad Parts. He describes, because he does this internal family system kind of approach where you want to be directed by your spirit and your true self, your core self, whatever you want to call that, right? Your eternal being, whatever that is. But you're also a multiplicity of parts. You don't just have your spirit directing, you also have all these other parts. So for me, I see the shadow work as really kind of getting to know and understand all of the different parts that exist within me, and that tend to jump into the driver's seat of the bus when they feel something is dangerous or unsafe. So the
Mm.
entire system is always asking that question without you even realizing it. It's like it's always there. Everything around you in your body, everything's kind of lit up, paying attention subconsciously, unconsciously, and consciously, and looking at the world through this lens of, is it safe or is it dangerous? Is
Mm.
this moment safe or is this moment dangerous? And it's always asking that question. And I really love how Resma Menakem in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, really describes that so clearly, just that question that's always being asked, like, is it safe or is it dangerous? And so that shadow work for me is, there are just some parts, whether they're younger parts, whether they're ancestral parts, whether they're family parts that aren't even mine, parts that come from my culture, past life parts, inner child parts, the parts from the collective unconscious. So they aren't necessarily always mine, but whether they are completely mine, because they're in my system, they're part of me. So in essence, they are mine, but they may not have derived from me, right? From my spirit, from my experience. They're part of me. All of those parts, whatever they're holding, they have this idea that, especially when you're in the deep shadow work of the grief and the parts that are really afraid and the parts that have the trauma and the parts that elicit the trauma response in your body, all those parts are really feeling unsafe. They're feeling alone and they can't see. They're on the bus with you. They're on the bus with your conscious mind. They're on the bus with your subconscious mind. They're on the bus with your spirit, but they can't see any of that. They think they are alone by themselves. So my job, as I see it when I'm doing that shadow work, is to just be really curious when the bus isn't going in the direction I want it to, or when the bus is at a full stop, won't even move forward at all, is to get really curious and to ask, okay, who's feeling scared? Who's feeling unsafe? Because to me, even it's just unsafe. I'm feeling unsafe. I don't want to move forward in this direction that you're going. I don't like where you're going. I haven't felt seen or heard. So my job is to see and validate and hold those parts so that those emotions can move through the system, so that they can feel safe enough to actually let my spirit lead, or allow me to lead, allow my core self to lead. Because no matter what, and I just think this is so interesting and so divine, that my spirit will not bulldoze any of my parts. And that's why we get so, when it comes to a trauma response, we're like, oh, it can feel so frustrating because you're like, I know what to do. I know what I want to do. I know the action that I want to take. I know what I want to experience, but I'm stuck here in this whatever kind of trauma trigger you're in, whether it's like I'm in shutdown or I'm spinning my wheels or I'm stuck in this self-sabotage behavior, whatever it is, you're just stuck there because your spirit, being the gentle, loving, compassionate, ever patient energy that it is, will never bulldoze a part. So if a part wants to jump into the driver's seat, it's going to let it jump into the driver's seat.
Oh my goodness, that was just such the most gorgeous explanation of shadow that I've ever heard. That was just so beautiful. And so loving. Yeah, there's just a real gentleness with that, and it makes so much sense as to, this is why it's such a deep to me, like working with shadow in that way is such a deeply important thing. And I think it makes sense of particularly the topic that we're here to even talk about how our trauma as witches particularly is like really stops us from just expressing ourselves, and as the spirit wants to kind of express as us. So yeah, I wonder if you can talk a little bit to that in the context of self-expression.
Well, I think it's so true, because there is this part, and I think the more that we become, the more I'll speak for myself, the more that I've dealt with my trauma, the more that I've really worked with those parts and really worked to understand why they were scared, what they were holding on to, what was going on, the more I could actually feel and live and embody my spirit and embody what I actually want to do. But when you have this disconnect, which I think so many of us, unfortunately, just carry because there's been emotional disconnection for so long. We're talking centuries, just depending on the culture that you live in. That is not true for every culture. It's true for the European culture from which I come from. There was definitely so much emotional disconnection. You were not taught how to be with your feelings. You were taught how to control your feelings. You were taught that you were supposed to control. You're not supposed to even have them. And if you do, you better express it in this way or that way that was manageable and easy for everyone else to handle. So there was just so much control involved that it quieted or created this disconnect. And when you add trauma to that, then what you also had is dissociation. And so living in a dissociated state more often than not causes such another degree of disconnection to your own emotions and feelings. How can you be tuned into what your spirit, how can you hear and feel what your spirit really wants when you're feeling so disconnected from your emotions? So what I love about working with creativity and with art and with the moon and all of that is that it just really opens up the emotional realm, and it opens up the heart center so that you can start feeling and start being attuned to your own emotional needs. Because that attunement, when you haven't had it as a child, and so many of us didn't, that attunement is so important in the healing process. Because being attuned, it's not only for the healing process, but it's also so important for managing your sensitivities and managing your spiritual gifts that come with it. You need to be attuned to your body. You need to be attuned to your emotions. You need to be attuned to what's going on inside of you as best as you can.
I love that so much. That makes so much sense, and I think it's so important. I'm just wondering, you talked somewhere, I can't remember where I read this now, but you talked about using magic from a clean place to heal our wounds. And I'm just wondering if you can explain or explore that a little bit in terms of what you mean.
For sure. Well, I think, when you're setting an intention, or when I kind of see it, I see magic as this beautiful place where you're playing with your gifts of creativity. You're playing with to me, it's like sitting down with my art journal or sitting down with my paints. There's this blank canvas, but I'm going to create something on it. And so that propulsion to create something, when your magic is coming from this place inside you that you are attuned to your spirit, that you are attuned to what's real and true for you. So there's an emotional maturity that is required, I think, to get to that place. Like it takes practice. Like I wasn't able to be that attuned to myself and my core self when I was younger. I had to go through the healing of my shadow self. I had to go through all of this healing in order to get to a place where it could be so clearly coming from my core self and not from a wounded part, or not from a part that maybe was wanting something that I didn't necessarily want. But when it comes from this like pure desire place, I don't care what the goal is, because I have goals and I have dreams that my spirit is pulling me towards, that I have so much judgments of. Like I have some materialistic kind of goals that my spirit is so pulling me to express. And I could cry around this because I have so much emotion around it, and I have so much history Like there's such a family history, white supremacist history, colonial, like there's so much history around this one goal that my spirit is moving me towards, that it's bringing up and pulls up and, causes, helps me, not causes, but helps me to see all of these parts that have all these stories that were not seen or heard or validated as I move towards this goal that in the beginning I judged so harshly, because I was like, oh, if it's from your core self, it can't be like this materialistic goal. It can't be this like, anything to do with such an earthly kind of thing. But oh my goodness, no, like diving deep into those kind of earthly goals can be so, again, it's like embodying the spirit. It's bringing the spirit right into that earthly realm and that earthly experience, which is just, so profound. When I allow it to be, when I don't, when my parts aren't stepping in and they're not like, oh, don't go there, I'm scared to go there, or oh, don't go there because it's bad, or whatever's getting triggered, whatever emotional triggers I'm experiencing with that. But I think with that spirit too, like with moving from the spirit, it's making me think, your question's making me think of something else as well that nobody had expressed to me before when it came to magic, but I had to learn. And so when I would go to sit down to do a spell in the past, I never checked in with my parts. I never asked my parts, how do you feel about this intention? Are any of you afraid? Do you feel unsafe with this direction that I'm wanting to go with the spell? And when you're working with your magic, whether you do spells or however you work your magic, if you're going to head out into a direction, and your parts aren't feeling safe with that, you're going to most likely, and I know for me, that was my experience, is I experienced a lot of resistance and a lot of upheaval, and a lot of trauma responses got triggered. And so I would cast a spell, and I would then have all of this physical, and not just resistance, but like the trauma response was so triggered by all my parts that got so activated that it was so hard on my body. And I don't think I would have noticed the extent to which that happens had I not gotten so sick and so sensitive. So my sensitivity like just went through the roof with my illness. Like I was sensitive to begin with, but that was just unbearable. And I think with that sensitivity getting to that degree really helped me to understand, oh, in order to work my magic in a gentle way, in order to move forward with my goals or my dreams or my intentions in a really gentle, kind way to my body, it would be really nice to add a step in my magic where I check in with my parts beforehand. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up developing just this way of working with my pendulum to just check in with my parts and try to tend to them before I even cast the spell.
I love that so much. You just reminded me of like before I ever do any kind of ritual or anything like that, is always something that I, funnily enough, and I wasn't even thinking in this way, but the way you've just described it kind of speaks to why I do that. I just really kind of check in with like the costs and benefits of like what I'm actually calling in. It feels like, yeah, there's a deep part of that is like about being truly conscious with our magic. And I think there's so much importance in being that conscious with our magic from that perspective of like, yeah, I mean, any of us can call in whatever big dreams we want, but we've also got to remember that we're going to get the material for liberation with that we're calling in, if that's something we're calling in.
Well, and destruction is a part of creation. And I think we really forget that whenever we're setting out. I know I did anyway. It's just, yeah, how when the destruction part comes, because something has to be destroyed. And it's not even necessarily that it has to be destroyed. It's just that there tends to be some destruction that has to happen so that it can build a new foundation, and so that something can be rebuilt in more to look like what you're wanting it to look like in your life. So often that destruction, after you cast a spell, you're gonna notice some things happen. Either some relationships fall apart, or you go through a deep, profound healing that just knocks you to your knees. And so checking in with your subconscious parts, or your shadow parts, or the parts of yourself that you're not conscious of. And I think that part is so key, to recognize that you are not going to be conscious of these parts. Your conscious mind doesn't have access to them. And so in order to have access to them, there has to be that invitation, and there has to be that willingness to allow it to rise to the surface in one way or another, whatever technique works, for you to actually be open and to receive those parts, and to give those parts space, give those parts of you space to speak, space to show up, space to be invited into the conversation that you're having with your magic, with the universe, with, here I'm going to have this conversation. Well, to me, it's kind of like being a really, really kind nurturer, a kind mother. I tend to see it as my mothering self. Really, how does my mothering self, how can she guide this magic in a gentle, kind way, bringing all her children with her? Not just, we're going to go and you better get on board because this is the direction we're going. And, I'm telling you like it is, we're moving forward no matter what. But instead, just like, okay, we're going to the store. Just want everybody to I'm going to check in with each of you. How do you feel about going to the store? What's going on for you when I'm talking about that? And just having the patience to do that, because it does require some patience, because you're not always going to be able to move forward as quickly as you want to, right? I've had to have patience sometimes for 10 years because there was, an intention that I set, but it just had a lot of healing work that had to be done before that intention could actually become a reality in my experience. I just needed to tend to a lot of things. And that just happened to be my journey. I don't think that's everybody's journey. But I think there are people like me, and I've met a lot of them, who just tend to have so much that they have to take care of and nurture and heal before their magic can actually move in the direction they want it to go.
Yeah, gorgeous. And it strikes me as you're talking there that the parts of us that want to rush are also those trying to drive the bus.
So true. So true.
So they want
Let me
some
press
love.
the gas. Let me press the gas. Let me go fast. Standing here and waiting is so boring. I don't like
it. Exactly. Yeah, I know that one well.
What I do think fascinating, though, and I really learned this from working with the MAP method, but also from working with my angels and spirit guides over the years, and just watching them, because as being a channel, it was never really me being the healer, not until, these recent years. But for my 20s and 30s, it was just me being the vehicle and watching how they help other people heal. So I got to be the witness of all of that happening. And both with the work that I do now with the MAP method that works with the subconscious mind, and the work that I witnessed with spirit, it's just so great because they have such an ability to manage the parts with so much more gentleness, mastery, kindness, and they can see so much of what I can't see. So there are these, I think, these parts within myself that require me to be conscious of them. So those parts can't really be tended to by my conscious mind, my subconscious mind. They can't be tended to by my spirit guides and angels in the same way, because they require my consciousness. And I don't always understand why that is, but I do. Over the years, I have seen that. Oh, and I've seen it with clients as well. And it's like, okay, these parts actually need us to have a conversation. They actually need us to acknowledge that they're there. We need to work one-on-one kind of with them there. And I find it's usually because there's learning that my conscious mind needs to, it's like downloading some learning that it needs to go through by actually having that experience. But there's so many parts that don't need that. And so they can be healed by my subconscious mind, and I don't even need to be part of it at all. Like, my conscious self does not need to be part of it. I just have to ask. I just have to know how to ask my subconscious mind to do what I'm wanting it to do. And it'll just gather all of the parts. And of course, it's so much more effective than the conscious way, because it doesn't just talk to one part. It like gathers all the parts that are connected with it and can do all, thousands of parts at the same time. It's like a supercomputer. It can do it so much better than just that, slower conscious way. One's not better than the other. I think they both have their benefits and their needs. Like, we need both of those experiences, but allowing your spirit guides and your angels or your subconscious mind to just tend to those parts for you, tend to your deep shadows, tend to your healing in the background, is just like magic in itself. That's magic right there, because you can go to sleep, ask for the healing, have the healing, and you didn't have to be an active participant in all of it.
I love that so much. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I often work with calling in like dream guides for that purpose as well. So I love that you've shared that. Yeah, what strikes me as you're talking, I think often one of the things that women, particularly witches as well, can really get hung up when especially when they first come to the deep work of shadow, is almost like this sense of like beating themselves up for their shadows. And what's come across as you've been speaking about shadow, and is very much the way I teach it as well, is that like these pieces of us are like innocent. They're not, they're not something to beat up. It's like really, really important that we bring love to them.
Yeah. Compassion is the medicine. Compassion is really what everything flows when you bring love and compassion into it, and patience and understanding and curiosity. If you can't get to compassion just yet, because I think sometimes when there are these parts of us that judge and that want things a certain way, it can be hard to feel the compassion, but it can sometimes be easier to jump to curiosity and at least be curious about it, so that you can start to open your heart towards the compassion. Because and when you haven't experienced a lot of compassion in your life, and I witnessed this with clients who've just had extreme cases of not a lot of love and compassion or attunement in their childhood or in their adulthood. So that can be such a foreign concept, the idea of being kind and gentle with themselves, because it's literally can feel like you're speaking a foreign language. I don't know what you're saying. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't really know what that means, but they can start with, okay, like, can I be a little bit curious? Can I start to get to know this, this aspect of myself? Can I ask questions? And then opening that path up, at least by having a conversation, compassion tends to follow naturally, because you're just getting curious and having this open conversation, right?
I love that so much, and that actually makes so much sense. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, actually, about curiosity and love being even difficult to access for so many people. So I love that you've shared that. Gorgeous. Let me just feel where to go next. There was something I was thinking of as you were speaking, and then I just got redirected by the curiosity.
No
um
problem.
I would love to hear more about, you keep mentioning this MAP method, and the way that you work with shadow, in a way for healing. And also the other, whilst I remember it, the other question was around trauma, and a lot often kind of people distinguish trauma as like trauma with a big T, trauma with a little t, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit as well. So it's kind of two questions there, sorry, but whilst they're
Yeah,
there.
no problem. I'll start with the second one because I'm not familiar with trauma with a big T or trauma with little t. I haven't heard that or come across that, but I'm
Oh.
suspecting what that means. Just when you're saying it, what it makes me think of is how sometimes we think of trauma as these big things that, you're in a war and you've experienced trauma, but that there are actually, it can be as simple, because when it comes to your inner child, and this is where I think it can be understood, is that through the eyes of a child, and every child is unique. So what makes one child feel afraid or abandoned emotionally or like literally is going to be so different than maybe what makes another child feel abandoned, or dismissed or ashamed. And so just understanding that it's so unique, like your trauma and what you found traumatic. Obviously, when again, I'm not understanding the reference, but to me, big trauma would be like the sexual trauma experienced at age 4. But then the littler trauma for me that was still so important, was a lot of the relational trauma and the like misattunement and like no emotional attunement, which then nobody being attuned to me emotionally really is a traumatic experience, because you're left there to try to soothe, comfort yourself, or you have these feelings that are too big. Your little body doesn't know what to do with it. Fear comes in. And for a child, obviously, there's this unconscious already understanding that I can't take care of myself. Like I literally cannot cause myself to survive. I'm a baby. I don't know how to, make sure I get fed. And so any kind of rupture with a caregiver is going to be traumatic. Being left off to deal with your own feelings is going to be traumatic. And then when you're older and you have these trauma responses, I've also seen that people not understanding that is what a trauma response was. Like, for instance, I had a client who would really get triggered when her kids were loud because they were having fun. And she's like, I don't understand why my body is shaking and why I can't handle it when they're having fun. And then I get short, I get my temper comes out. I have a stern look on my face. This is not how I want to act with them. They're not even deserving it in this moment at all, nor would they ever be deserving it in her mind. But, she just was not approaching her parenthood how she wanted to, because she was having a trauma response. And that trauma response was getting activated. And so when you look at it, and we don't always need to know the root of the trauma, especially when you're working with the MAP method, because the root is just unnecessary to know. And I don't mean that always, like this isn't a blanket statement. Sometimes you do, like I said, sometimes your conscious mind, for some reason, you need to know the root of it. For some bigger spiritual reason is kind of how I see it. But you don't often always need to see the reason. And so, for instance, when you're working with the MAP method, as I was talking about, like with how the subconscious mind. So because I'm a channel, two things are happening. It's a little complicated in my world. That's sensitivities, right? You're like operating on different realms, and you're operating on different experiences in your mind. But one of the realms is really just asking the subconscious, okay, so I get her to think about the laughter. I get her to feel She kind of brings up a little bit of the feelings of what that triggers in her. She remembers, oh, it triggers this. And then I give instructions to the subconscious mind. So in this way, it's like you're telling the subconscious mind what to do. You're saying, hey, can you please go and do this? Notice this body response, notice these sensations, notice this activation. Now go clear the memories that are connected with this, neutralize them so that it's no longer a trigger. So then what happens is the subconscious goes and does what it does, and we're not always conscious of what's going on. It literally, like I have clients that it's strictly sensations. They're just like, oh, my, all of a sudden my chest got tight and then it loosened up. And then we go to revisit it and they tell me later, wow, that's not even a trigger. It's completely gone. That doesn't even exist as a trigger for me anymore. So the subconscious went in and really dealt with those parts and you could call it parts like I call it. You could also go in the neuroscience realm and call it the brain rewiring. Like it really, that's just not the way I tend to look at things, because I tend to go in that heart-based kind of feeling arena when it comes to my shadow work. But that is another way that you could look at it, or that's another way it could be described.
Oh, that's gorgeous. So much magic in that. I'm just feeling where to go next. I loved yeah, that's absolutely what I meant about the trauma with a little T versus a big T. So I'm glad that you spoke to that, because it's so, again, it feels so validating for you to share that for all our women at home as well, to know that, you know, whatever trauma they have experienced, it's all valid and also welcome, and all possible to heal as well. So that's really gorgeous.
You know, when you're saying that, Nicole, it's reminding me of this like experience of having these high sensitivities with trauma and watching people be able to do things that you can't do yet, because whether, I add illness to that. And just watching people not have the same kind of stuckness or not have the same sensitivities. And I just want to validate for myself and for anyone who feels this way as well, that it's really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch people not have that same experience, or it's even really hard to have that experience and not have a lot of people understand it, right? Not have a lot of people being able to validate that for you, that, oh, wow, yeah, like just getting up in the morning and just doing the things that you're doing in a day is gonna be so much harder. Like you're starting at a completely different baseline than someone else. So they're already 5 steps ahead on the baseline than you are. And you're having to catch up just to get to that point where you can be functional in the way that you want to. And there's so much grief in that I can't be as functional, or I can't be as I can't show up in and shine the way that my spirit wants to shine, because of all this stuff that's going on, and to just validate, that you're right. Right now, you can't shine in the same way, but I promise you, if you get curious and you are open to kind of looking at it from a different perspective and finding ways that you can shine, that you can still kind of be embodied in your spirit, but maybe at a different pace or in a different way, so that you can be like, oh, okay, it's not that it's not going to happen. It's just, this is what it looks like for me. This is what it looks like for my body, right? This is the pace I can go. And then when I accept my pace, I accept my path, all of a sudden, these which really in essence mean I accept my sensitivity, I accept that when I'm not in resistance, when I'm not frustrated by it, but when I can actually accept it, then all of a sudden these like alternative solutions pop up, or these like creative ways of getting to the same destination, but maybe not in the way that you're seeing everybody outside you do it. Those, all of a sudden my mind starts to like be open to those things, and I can see, oh, well, if I just do this and this and this in my business, and if I just maneuver it this way, which is I have had to do, like being an entrepreneur, oh my goodness, talk about working with your sensitivities in a very creative way so that you can still show up and do your work and be kind to your body at the same time. It just takes so much creativity and so much thinking outside the box and thinking, okay, maybe I can't actually do the cookie cutter way or follow these steps that like this coach says or that coach says, because I have to tweak things. I have to take different things into consideration that just are not being modeled to me, you know, by other people who don't have that same baseline, who aren't at that same baseline.
What you're talking to there really reminds me of like this, it comes back to me for like really the deepest, living in the deepest alignment to our souls. And although like the cookie cutter ways may be what we're taught, it's like, what is our medicine? What is our way of being with that medicine in the world? And it's just like our souls know if we allow ourselves. And for me, that deep sensitivity is really, as it we kind of come back full circle, actually. Like I know that we needed to almost go into like all that piece about trauma, which is how I see it working in real life. Actually, we need to go into that and also see that there is this power that we have to be able to choose to meet our edge, our soft edge, I would call it. Like we don't want to be meeting like I feel the fear and do it anyway kind of 10 out of 10 edge. We want to be meeting our soft edge and like love ourselves tenderly and hold ourselves in order to take the aligned steps that are right for us. And that's what you were speaking to then, just reminded me of. And I love that you've kind of brought that to presence there.
Yeah, it's so true, because that opens up so much for the spirit to move through, and just the, you know, as you're speaking, it reminded me the gratitude that I have felt in the journey. You know, when you were talking about, the light, the goodness that comes out of the difficulty, right? And the goodness that did come out for this, for me, was that I could see that power and strength that I have. That is formidable. My spirit is so powerful, and everybody's spirit is so powerful, even when you're highly sensitive, even when you're in this experience of really maybe not, you know, your body maybe isn't feeling as powerful or strong as you want it to be, but wow, that formidable spirit, and how amazing and creative and unlimitless, like just limitless in terms of even finding solutions to the problems I personally face with these sensitivities, right? That there are limitless solutions and limitless ways, and that acceptance is part of it as well. Like that I remember this one moment. I often connect and have had these miraculous, amazing, like bring me to my knees moments with what I see as like great soul mother or like divine mother. And oh my goodness. And I remember this one conversation where she was just with all of this love asking me to accept that I will always be sensitive, that I will always have to manage this, that it is never, nor has it ever been, about healing so that I cannot be sensitive, so I can be like everybody else, that will never be my reality. And so just accept that, Dana. And then, of course, the journey of grief and healing with that at first, right? Because, I don't want to accept that. I just want to be like everybody else. Why can't I do these things?
Yeah, and yet here you are being a gift for all those sensitive women. That's feels like your medicine.
Thank you. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Well, we're coming up on time, so I would love for our listeners to be able to know how to contact you and how to, like, what you're working on, and anything that feels good to share.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of what I do right now and just love is art journaling with the moon, because I really find when I started to become in attunement with the moon and the cycles of the seasons and the lunar cycles, and even now I'm noticing I'm also kind of coming into attunement with the cosmic cycles, and it has been so helpful to my nervous system. It this creates this co-regulation, this ability to regulate myself and my nervous system. It feels contained. The fact that I just follow this rhythm with the moon, like that I sit down and I do my magic at the new moon and I do my magic at the full moon, and I create with the moon phases, and I just sit down and work with that rhythm has been uh, yeah, just it's like a somebody just hugging your body and just holding you and being like, oh, okay, you are held here, you are seen here. And so for me, art journaling with the moon, I do that in my private Facebook group, which is on my website, that there's access to it on my website. It tells you where to go, and that's just danadaponte.com. And that's where I am bringing and will be bringing most of my goodness. And then, of course, just my email. People on my email list get my creative moon cycle guide every new moon. So just working with those lunar rhythms for both healing and magic, both of those things.
Oh, gorgeous. That's yeah, I'll include all of that with the show notes so that people can find you. I'm sure they'll be very excited to dive into all of that. So yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dana, for sharing your story and your journey and your magic with us. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so very much.
This is a very illuminating episode for all those sensitive secret witches. Here are my takeaways. Being highly sensitive as a witch is a gift, which isn't how most people hold it. It gives you access to invisible realms and fine attunement to parts of our experience that not everyone can sense. And it doesn't always feel like a gift. And it's important to be with that as part of the journey, as part of your healing, to feel what wants to be felt. Our shadow is the young parts of us that want to get in the driver's seat when spirit should be driving. They are the parts looking for whatever is dangerous and unsafe and which try and stop us from shining. Being in a trauma response can feel frustrating, but the more we deal with our trauma and work with these parts to learn why they are scared and to let them know it's safe, the more we can actually feel and live in our bodies and be with our spirits and embody what we're actually here for. When we love and accept ourselves as we are, alternative solutions pop up, creative ways of getting to the same destination, but maybe not in the way we saw. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.